Good afternoon. Hope no, it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. Glad to see so many people. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, we can
Yep.
see the
I'll
screen.
take that. Perfect. Thanks. So I'm here to talk to you about give an update on the second year of working on developing a spatial justice index for North Carolina communities. As Dr. Deb mentioned, I'm professor of geography, also the faculty lead for something called the Spatial Justice Studio. So this is a project that I've been thinking about for several years and have been actively engaged with during my time with CADS. I also want to just say thank you to Raj Pujo. He's an undergraduate research assistant who's helped with me in the last 2 years and is graduating, and I believe is starting his master's program shortly. So appreciate the support of CADS and Raj throughout this project. Let's see if it'll let me advance my screen. There we go. So the focus of this is basically how can one measure spatial justice, or in more real terms, spatial injustice. So it's a geographic question. Most of the existing literature has focused on kind of theory of what it means to be spatially just or unjust, some qualitative case studies and analysis of specific locations and specific programs. But this research wants to take spatial justice into a more quantitative direction, to be able to take geographic, quantifiable variables and develop an index that could be used for cross-community comparison, so that we can begin to say how spatially just or unjust a community might be, a neighborhood might be, a given geography. Because we're well aware of the fact that we have very many parts of communities that are unsustainable, that are unequitable, and that suffer from multiple spatial injustices. And that's something that I'll mention here in a few slides as a major issue related to getting into this research. The activities included that we've been working on are trying to identify as many different attributes, features that can be correlated to this idea of spatial justice. Collecting this information, then building machine learning models so that we can begin to create something that is usable. And this research for this purposes is focusing on using GIS technologies combined with US Census data to develop it. And we start off in North Carolina, and with that, the original, and when I reported last year, we were looking at all of North Carolina, and I'll tell you an update here. We've kind of narrowed it down for several purposes since last year. I've been talking this thing, spatial justice, been mentioning it. Maybe you've heard it before. Many people tell me they've never heard those two words together. But we know spatial justice is a concept that seeks to begin the process of understanding the root causes of spatial inequalities. And then, more importantly, now that we know they exist, what are the causes of these inequalities? How can we begin to fix them? It was a term coined by a geographer who is now passed, Ed Soja, who's at UCLA. And it's definitely related to the ideas of just sustainability, equitability. I have a colleague in the Netherlands, Roberto Rocco, who was quoted in one of his papers on this. One of the best definitions, when people say, well, really, you're still not telling me what spatial justice is. Spatial justice refers to the general access to public goods, basic services, cultural goods, economic opportunity, and healthy environments for residents. And so achieving spatial justice would mean that we were able to address the inequitable distribution of these things. And so the question comes to pass then, well, how can we begin to measure this? One, as a starting point; two, as we make progress towards tackling this goal; and then three, what would success maybe look like? And in my mind, the development of an index was a good starting point for this. Over the last year, happy to announce we've had another paper published, Dr. Deb and myself, application of random forest and shape tree explainer in exploring spatial injustice to aid urban planning. There's a poster upcoming at a conference in June related to this work. I presented some of the findings at the Race, Ethnicity, and Place conference, which was part of the Mid-Atlantic Division of the American Association of Geographers. That was in October. Raj, who I mentioned earlier, presented posters at CDAG, the Southeast Division of Geographers, as well as a poster at Scholarship Day. So we've been active, kind of disseminating what we've learned and what we're still learning about this topic. As I mentioned before, there's been a little bit of a new focus and a reboot as we started, and then now we've kind of had to come back a little bit. Originally, we were going to look at all 2,000 or so census tracts in the state of North Carolina. After playing with that data, plus interacting with some academics and getting some reviews from some articles we submitted, there was a legitimate question of, well, aren't those tracts very different? There's a difference between what maybe the spatial injustice issues are in a very rural community versus a very urban community. And so we've refocused and are currently collecting data to just focus within Forsyth County as a base, and then expand to the urban census tracts inside North Carolina, which will be a little bit over 1,000. So half our data set is going to go by the wayside because they're rural in character. And if you want to think about it this way, if a community is suffering from being a food desert, meaning that they don't have access to local foods in their community, in an urban context, that could mean that you're a mile away from a grocery store. In a rural context, if you're a mile from a grocery store, that's like really close. And so we're trying to ferret out these differences of geography as they relate to different types of places. We're also going to focus, and we've been collecting and going to add more spatial variables to the project, things like distance from features, the density of features, trying to get the underlying physical and built environment attributes. And then the final piece is rethinking kind of the use of a dependent variable. I think we're leaning away from using a multiple regression model to maybe more of a principal component analysis to develop the index itself. So this is a slide that I shared last year. What I want to note on it is the yellow there. These are the new measures that we're adding to our already geographic data set for the development of the index. We have a measure of street connectivity, the land use mixture, tree canopy, and then a variety of distance to measures, including distance to a redlined community, historically going back to the 1930s, distance to parks, grocery stores, things like that. This shows you for Forsyth County, and I do show all 93 census tracts on here. Forsyth County is the whole county is considered metropolitan, and we did some exploratory measures comparing the metropolitan tracts to the urban tracts. Here's the metropolitan results of just looking at average distance to the top left is grocery stores, top right is tree canopy, bottom left is distance to brownfields, bottom right is distance to redlined communities, to just get an idea of how does distance, in addition to, we already had a variety of variables that showed density of things, how many of something was in a location. Well, how far are things from a location is another measure of spatial injustice that we're incorporating into this conversation.
I have about three more minutes.
Thank you. We did take these new variables and include them in 2 regression models to just see which ones rose to the top, and we compared them to a measure of economic mobility. As I mentioned earlier, this idea of spatial justice, there isn't just one measure of spatial justice. That's where we're trying to get to. But at this time, it's really hard to know, well, should we be looking at economic spatial justice? Should we be looking at environmental spatial justice, transportation? So for this purpose, when we put all of our variables in, you can see we have some pretty robust there, R-squared values. Interestingly, some of the new ones did pop up as very important. Percent tree coverage in a community, the nearest to a red line area was very important as well. And so the results indicate that several of these new variables are going to play an important role. And the tables show there, one of the models 74%, the other one 70%, and that utilizing this new approach of first limiting it to the urban spaces, and then 2, increasing our number of geographic or spatial variables, are going to lead us down a path to create a more accurate spatial justice index for communities. So the focus this summer is to get the Forsyth County data collected, analyzed with these new variables, then move on to the whole state of North Carolina with the final goal of developing this index through some grant funding at a national scale for urban spaces. I've had someone ask about what about the rural. I don't want to say someone else's problem, but maybe that's something else to tackle in the future. And so I think I mentioned those couple things. Of course, we're always looking to publish the work. If anyone can think of any additional variables, love to hear it either in the chat or you can send me an email. These are ones, the hard part is that we can come up with lots of great ones. Are they available and at the scale we need is always some of a major concern. So thank you for your time, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. Let me stop my share.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for a great presentation.
Okay, I guess I'll ask a question. I always have a question.
Sure.
I really like this because I know that it helps us to get resources to people that really need. And have you been able to, I guess, talk to some of the federal agencies to get some data from them that you would need that's not maybe readily available, but that they have? Because I look at when in Department of Education, right? They know who is on free and reduced lunch. So they already know who has a problem with food insecurity and how that translates into a person's ability to learn, right? When they're in school. So if you're able to get that data, and that's good data. So are you able to get a hold of that, and would that help you?
Sure. No, I think there's a lot of data that, we have surrogates for information like that, such as there is a readily available data set of showing which census tracts are food deserts. There's, as I mentioned, we have not only the location of grocery stores, so the density of food options within a community, plus how far the center, what we do is a centroid of every census tract and then do a distance from the center of the tract to the nearest park, to the nearest grocery store. So that data, one of the things that we've really tried to focus on is the spatial attributes of the community, not the socioeconomic, not the demographic. We're trying to stay away from the people that there's a lot of information out there already about, what's the percent poverty here and what's the income level and how many people graduate. We're looking at what are the underlying physical traits of the built environment that could lead to success or lead to communities being distressed. So we're having conversations, and actually separate from this project but related, Forsyth County funded a project to create what's called a Neighborhood Opportunity Atlas, in which we're doing this in Forsyth County, and see there's a lot of interest in replicating this and using, kind of crossing over this project with that project for replication in other places.